Close your eyes and picture this, a sun so fierce and brilliant it seems to hammer the very earth into submission. A landscape of endless shifting sands, a sea of gold and ochre stretching to the horizon. And cutting through this vast, arid silence, a miracle, a ribbon of life, a river of such profound power that it alone defies the emptiness. This is the Nile. This is Egypt. For over 3,000 years, a civilization flourished here so magnificent, so advanced, and so spiritually profound that its echoes have never faded. They built not in wood, but in stone meant to withstand eternity. They saw their kings not as men, but as living gods. They viewed death not as an end, but as a glorious beginning. This is the story of a people who looked to the stars and saw their destiny, who carved their beliefs into the very bedrock of the world, and whose legacy continues to whisper its secrets to those who listen. This is the epic of ancient Egypt. To understand Egypt is to first understand its lifeblood, the Nile River. It was not merely a geographical feature. It was the central, pulsating artery of the entire civilization, a divine gift without which nothing would have been possible. Imagine the annual inundation, a predictable, miraculous event where the river would overflow its banks, not with destructive fury, but with life-giving abundance. It deposited layer upon layer of rich, black silt across the floodplain, transforming the barren Desert, the red land of the desert, into the fertile Kemet, the black land. This was the foundation upon which everything was built. The rhythm of the Nile dictated the rhythm of Egyptian life. It created 3 distinct seasons. Akhet, the inundation, when the fields were submerged and farmers could be conscripted for state projects like the pyramids. Paret, the growing season, when the waters receded and sowing and tending to crops began. And Shemu, the harvest season, when the grain was cut and stored. The river was their highway, facilitating trade and communication from the sweltering south in Nubia to the cool marshes of the delta in the north. It was a source of sustenance, teeming with fish and fowl. Papyrus reeds growing along its banks were used for everything from paper and sandals to ropes and boats. The Nile was so central to their identity that their entire worldview was oriented towards its source. The south was Upper Egypt, and the north, where the river fanned out into the Mediterranean, was Lower Egypt. It was the constant, the provider, the clock by which they set their lives and the canvas upon which they would paint their incredible story. The origins of this great civilization stretch back into the mists of prehistory, to a time before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, when small communities of hunter-gatherers began to settle along the Nile's beneficent banks. Around 5500 BCE, during the pre-dynastic period, these communities evolved into sophisticated cultures with distinct identities, such as the Badarian and Nakata cultures in the south. They developed agriculture, domesticated animals, created sophisticated pottery, and began to establish the social and religious structures that would define Egypt for millennia. The pivotal moment, the event that truly forged the Egyptian state, occurred around 3100 BCE. This was the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, a feat traditionally attributed to a legendary king named Menes, who is often identified with the pharaoh Narmer. The iconic Narmer palette, a ceremonial slate carving, is thought to commemorate this very event, depicting the king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one side and the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other, symbolizing the bringing together of the two lands under one rule. This was the beginning of the dynastic period, a system of chronology we still use today, organized by the historian Manetho into 31 dynasties. The unification was more than a political act, it was a cosmological one. The pharaoh's primary role was to maintain Ma'at, the fundamental order of the universe, which included the harmony between these two distinct regions. From this point forward, Egypt was a single, powerful entity, poised to embark on its 3,000-year journey through history. The history of ancient Egypt is a vast tapestry, but it is traditionally divided into 3 golden ages, periods of strong central government, prosperity, and unparalleled artistic and architectural achievement, separated by 3 intermediate periods, times of disunity, weaker leadership, and often foreign influence. The Old Kingdom, spanning from approximately 2686 to 2181 BCE, is often called the Age of the Pyramids. This was the era when the power of the pharaoh was at its absolute zenith, viewed as a living god on earth. It was under kings like Djoser, for whom the step pyramid at Saqqara was built by the genius architect Imhotep, that monumental stone architecture truly began. But the Old Kingdom is synonymous with the great pharaohs of the 4th dynasty. Sneferu, who perfected the true pyramid form, and his successors Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, who erected the breathtaking pyramids on the Giza Plateau. These were not just tombs. They were statements of divine power, colossal machines designed to launch the soul of the king into the afterlife to join the gods. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and the only one still standing, was the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. The administration of the state was a complex bureaucracy, and the art of this period is characterized by a sublime, formalized perfection intended to last for eternity. New segment, Mysteries and Stories of the Pyramids. But the Great Pyramid of Khufu holds secrets that stir the imagination and challenge our understanding of ancient technology. For centuries, it was believed to be a simple, if massive, tomb containing only a few empty chambers. But modern science has begun to peer through the stone, revealing startling voids. Using non-invasive techniques like muon radiography, which uses cosmic rays to see through solid rock, scientists have recently discovered large, previously unknown cavities within the pyramid's structure. The most significant, dubbed the Big Void, is a cavernous space located directly above the Grand Gallery, measuring over 30 meters long. Its purpose is a complete mystery. Was it a relieving chamber to distribute the immense weight of the stone above? A hidden storage room for ritual objects? Or perhaps something more profound? This discovery has reignited theories that the pyramid's true purpose and contents are still hidden from us. Some researchers, like those involved in the Scan Pyramids project, propose that the internal structure of the Great Pyramid is far more complex than anyone dreamed, suggesting that the ancient builders possessed a level of architectural planning so advanced we are only now beginning to detect its fingerprints. This isn't the work of alien hands, as some fanciful theories suggest, but the lingering genius of human minds whose full capabilities we are still struggling to measure. The pyramid, it seems, is not yet done revealing its secrets. And the story of the pyramids is also a story of human drama, of ambition, jealousy, and a curse from beyond the grave. While Khufu's pyramid is the largest, the story of the second pyramid, built by his son Khafre, is shrouded in a tantalizing legend recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus. He tells a tale that Khufu, having exhausted his treasury building his own colossal tomb, grew desperate. Needing more wealth to secure his own afterlife, he resorted to a sacrilegious act. According to the story, he sent his own daughter to a common brothel, but with a strange and cunning plan. He commanded her to ask each of her clients for a gift of a single stone block. From these blocks, paid for not with gold, but with her own honor, the daughter supposedly built a smaller pyramid for herself in front of her father's great monument. While this story is almost certainly a myth, a piece of anti-Khufu propaganda that circulated centuries after his death, it reveals how later cultures viewed the staggering ambition and absolute power of the pyramid builders. It paints a picture of a pharaoh so consumed by his quest for immortality that he would transgress the most sacred social bonds. The truth is likely that these pyramids were the product of a highly organized state and the skilled labor of devoted Egyptian workers. But the legend endures, a dark fairy tale whispered alongside the mathematical and architectural marvel, reminding us that behind these silent monuments of stone were people with all their human flaws and passions. However, even the mightiest empires can falter. The Old Kingdom eventually collapsed, giving way to the First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation, lower Nile floods, and famine. Central authority broke down, and local governors fought for power. This era of chaos was in many ways a crucible that refined the Egyptian spirit. It was followed by the Middle Kingdom, roughly 2055 to 1650 BCE, a period often considered the classical age of Egyptian literature and culture. The pharaohs of the 11th and 12th dynasties, like Mentuhotep II, who reunified the country, and the great Amenemhat and Senusret kings, presented a different model of kingship. While still divine, the pharaoh was now portrayed as a shepherd to his people, a responsible and caring ruler. They moved their capital to Thebes and embarked on massive land reclamation and irrigation projects in the Fayum oasis. The art of this period reflects a new sensitivity, with royal portraits showing faces lined with age and care, a humanity absent from the aloof idealism of the Old Kingdom. They built fortresses in Nubia to control the gold trade and secured Egypt's borders. This was a renaissance of confidence and administrative efficiency. Yet the cycle repeated. The Middle Kingdom dissolved into the Second Intermediate Period, which saw one of the most humiliating chapters in Egyptian history: the invasion and rule by the Hyksos, a Semitic people from the Levant. The Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, introduced new military technology to Egypt, most notably the horse and chariot, which would later become the backbone of the Egyptian war machine. The expulsion of the Hyksos was the catalyst for the greatest of all Egyptian eras, the New Kingdom, from 1550 to 1069 BCE. This was the age of empire, the age of colossal temples, and the age of some of the most famous pharaohs. The early 18th dynasty was a time of warrior kings. Ahmose I expelled the Hyksos. Then came Thutmose I and III, who expanded Egypt's borders further than ever before, creating an empire that stretched from Syria in the north to deep into Nubia in the south. But this era also produced one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in history: Queen Hatshepsut, a woman who ruled as a full pharaoh for over 20 years. She commissioned one of the most beautiful temples in all of Egypt, her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, and her reign was one of peace, prosperity, and magnificent trading expeditions. Then, a century later, came the heretic king, Akhenaten. He attempted a religious revolution, rejecting the entire pantheon of gods, especially the powerful priesthood of Amen, in favor of the worship of a single deity, the Aten, or the sun disk. He moved the capital to a brand new city, Akhetaten, and a new, startlingly naturalistic art style emerged. His wife was the legendary Nefertiti, whose famous bust remains an icon of beauty. And from his line came the boy king Tutankhamun, who is far more famous in death for his intact tomb than for his short and relatively insignificant reign. The restoration of the old gods after Akhenaten's revolution set the stage for the Ramesside period of the 19th and 20th dynasties, dominated by Ramses II the Great. Ramses II ruled for 66 years, built more monuments and sired more children than any other pharaoh, and fought the Hittites to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh. His temple at Abu Simbel, with its colossal seated statues, is a monument to his ego and power. But after Ramses II, the empire's power slowly waned. The New Kingdom collapsed into the Third Intermediate Period, and Egypt entered a long, slow decline, witnessing successive invasions by Libyans, Nubians, Persians, and finally, the conquest by Alexander the Great, which ushered in the Greco-Roman period and the end of the ancient Egyptian civilization as an independent power. To comprehend the actions, the art, and the very soul of the ancient Egyptians, one must delve into their rich and complex mythology. Their world was not governed by chance. It was a carefully ordered cosmos, a delicate balance between the forces of order known as Ma'at and the ever-present threat of chaos known as Isfit. The gods were not distant entities. They were immanent, present in every aspect of the natural world, from the rising sun to the flooding of the Nile. The Egyptian pantheon was vast, with hundreds of deities, often with overlapping roles and fluid identities that changed over time and location. At the heart of their cosmology was the creation story, which had several versions centered in different cult cities. The most influential was the Heliopolitan creation myth. In the beginning, there was only the swirling, dark waters of chaos, called Nun. From these primordial waters rose a mound of earth, and upon it, the god Atum willed himself into existence. Atum, a creator deity, then produced the first divine couple, Shu air and Tefnut moisture, who in turn gave birth to Jeb earth and Nut sky. The image of Nut, her star-studded body arched over her brother-husband Jeb with their father Shu standing between them, is one of the most enduring in Egyptian iconography. Jeb and Nut then produced the two most important sibling pairs, Osiris and Isis, and Seth and Nephthys, whose story would form the core of Egyptian religious belief. The myth of Osiris is the great epic of Egyptian mythology. Osiris, the wise and good king, brought civilization to Egypt. His brother Seth, the god of chaos, violence, and the desert, was consumed by jealousy. In a famous banquet, Seth tricked Osiris into lying in a beautifully decorated chest, which he then sealed shut and threw into the Nile. Osiris drowned. The devoted Isis, his sister wife, searched the world for his body. She found it in the city of Byblos, brought it back to Egypt, and using her powerful magic, she resurrected Osiris long enough to conceive their son, Horus. However, Seth discovered the body and in a rage dismembered it into 14 pieces, scattering them across the land. Isis, with the help of her sister Nephthys, searched again, finding every piece except his phallus, which had been eaten by a fish. She reassembled Osiris and, through her magic, created a replacement phallus, allowing for the conception of Horus to be completed. From this point, Osiris could no longer rule the land of the living. He descended to become the lord of the underworld, the judge of the dead. His resurrection, though partial, made him the god of rebirth and fertility, intimately connected with the annual death and rebirth of the Nile's vegetation. His son, Horus, the falcon-headed god, then avenged his father by battling his uncle Seth. The conflict was long and brutal, resulting in Horus losing an eye and Seth suffering grievous wounds. Ultimately, a tribunal of gods intervened, awarding the throne of Egypt to Horus, who became the archetype for every living pharaoh. Seth was not destroyed, but was assigned a role as a necessary force of chaos, reigning over the hostile desert. This myth established the fundamental principles of Egyptian society: the rightful heir avenging his father, the triumph of order over chaos, the concept of resurrection and life after death, and the divine justification for kingship. Every pharaoh was the living Horus, and upon his death he became Osiris. Beyond the Osiris cycle, the daily cycle of the sun was a dominant religious theme. The sun god, known by many names including Ra, was the supreme creator. Each day, he was born in the east and sailed across the sky in his solar bark. At sunset, he entered the underworld, where he had to navigate the treacherous 12 hours of the night, battling the great serpent of chaos, Apep. If Ra succeeded, he would be reborn at dawn, ensuring the continuation of the world. This nightly journey of the sun through the underworld was directly linked to the journey of the human soul after death, as detailed in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead. Other major deities included Thoth, the ibis or baboon-headed god of wisdom, writing, and the moon, who acted as a scribe and mediator among the gods; Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the guardian of the necropolis, who oversaw the mummification process and guided the dead; and Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of love, beauty, music, and drunkenness, who was a protective and joyful deity. Later, during the New Kingdom, the god Amun, originally a local Theban deity, merged with Ra to become Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, whose priesthood at Karnak grew to wield immense economic and political power, rivaling that of the pharaoh himself. The belief in the afterlife was the single most powerful driving force in Egyptian culture, influencing their architecture, their art, and their daily rituals. Death was not an end, but a transition to a new and hopefully better life in the field of reeds, a perfect, idealized version of Egypt. To reach this paradise, however, the soul had to overcome immense dangers and pass a final, terrifying judgment. The journey was guided by spells and incantations. In the Old Kingdom, these pyramid texts were inscribed inside the tombs of pharaohs. This evolved into the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, written on the sarcophagi of nobles, and finally into the Book of the Dead in the New Kingdom, a collection of nearly 200 spells written on papyrus scrolls and placed in the tomb with the deceased. These texts provided a map of the underworld, gave the soul the passwords needed to get past demonic gatekeepers, and contained spells to protect against supernatural threats. The most critical moment was the weighing of the heart ceremony. The deceased would be led by Anubis into the Hall of Judgment before Osiris and a tribunal of 42 judges. The heart of the deceased, which was believed to contain a record of all their deeds in life, was placed on a scale and balanced against the feather of Maat, representing truth and cosmic order. Thoth, the god of wisdom, stood by to record the result. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighed down by sin and wrongdoing, the fearsome beast Ammit, part lion, hippo, and crocodile, the devourer of the dead, would lunge forward and consume the heart, condemning the soul to a second, eternal death, a state of non-existence. But if the heart was in balance, if the person had lived a just life, Osiris would grant them entry into the blissful field of reeds. To ensure a favorable outcome, the Egyptians also placed negative confessions in the tomb, where the deceased would declare their innocence of a long list of sins, stating, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused anyone to weep." To survive this journey and thrive in the afterlife, the Ka, or life force, of the deceased needed a physical anchor in the world of the living. This is the root of the Egyptians' most famous practice, mummification. The preservation of the body was absolutely essential. If the body decayed, the Ka would have no place to reside, and the afterlife would be lost. The process of mummification was a complex, ritualized procedure that took 70 days. It was performed by specialized priests wearing masks of Anubis. The brain, considered unimportant, was removed in fragments through the nose with a hook and discarded. The internal organs, the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, were considered vital and were carefully removed through an incision on the left side, embalmed, and placed in 4 special containers known as canopic jars, each under the protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus. The heart, however, was left inside the body, as it was the seat of intelligence and emotion and was needed for the final judgment. The body was then packed with natron, a natural salt, which dehydrated the tissues and prevented decomposition. After 40 days, the natron was removed, the body cavity was stuffed with linen or sawdust, and the skin was anointed with oils and resins. Finally, the body was meticulously wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen strips, with amulets and magical jewelry placed between the layers to provide protection. A funerary mask, often made of gold and inlaid with semi-precious stones, was placed over the head and shoulders of the mummy. The most famous example is the solid gold mask of Tutankhamun, an object of breathtaking beauty that was meant to magically ensure the king's features would be preserved for eternity. The wrapped mummy was then placed in a series of nested coffins, which were themselves placed inside a stone sarcophagus and sealed within the tomb. The tomb itself was not merely a grave, it was the house of eternity, a permanent residence for the Ka. It was stocked with everything the deceased would need for a comfortable afterlife: furniture, clothing, jewelry, weapons, and most importantly, food and drink. Scenes of banqueting, hunting, and farming were painted on the tomb walls, and models of servants, known as shabtis, were included. These shabti figures, often hundreds of them, were inscribed with a spell that would magically animate them in the afterlife to perform any manual labor required by the gods on behalf of the deceased. The tomb was the ultimate insurance policy for immortality, a sealed universe designed to provide for the soul forever. This profound and elaborate belief system, from the judgment before Osiris to the meticulous preservation of the body, reveals a people utterly obsessed with life and its continuation, who poured their greatest resources and artistic genius into conquering death itself. The most visible and enduring legacy of this belief are the monumental structures they left behind. The architecture of ancient Egypt was engineered for eternity, to make a statement of power that would last forever. The most iconic of these are, of course, the pyramids. The evolution of the pyramid form is a story of architectural ambition. It began with the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built around 2670 BCE by the architect Imhotep, who was later deified for his genius. This was not a true pyramid, but a series of 6 mastaba tombs of decreasing size, stacked on top of one another. It was the world's first large-scale stone building. The experiment culminated in the smooth-sided true pyramids of the 4th dynasty at Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is a marvel of engineering. It is estimated to contain 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, some brought from quarries hundreds of miles away. The precision is staggering. The sides are aligned almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal points, and the base is level to within an inch. How this was achieved remains one of history's great mysteries, involving ramps, levers, and the coordinated labor of tens of thousands of skilled workers, not slaves, who were housed and fed in a nearby purpose-built village. The pyramid complex also included smaller pyramids for queens, mortuary temples where the cult of the dead king would be maintained, and causeways connecting them. The Great Sphinx, a colossal limestone statue with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, believed to represent Khafre, guards the plateau. It is the embodiment of royal power and wisdom, its inscrutable gaze fixed on the eastern horizon. While the pyramids define the Old Kingdom, the grand temples define the New Kingdom. These were not places for public worship, but the dwelling places of the gods on earth, where only the pharaoh and the high priests were allowed into the inner sanctums. The temple was a microcosm of the universe. One entered through a massive pylon gate, often flanked by obelisks and colossal statues of the pharaoh, representing the primordial mound rising from the waters of Nun. Next came open courtyards, followed by a hypostyle hall, a forest of towering columns, carved to resemble papyrus and lotus plants, symbolizing the marsh of creation. The deeper one went into the temple, the floor rose, the ceiling lowered, and the light dimmed, creating an atmosphere of increasing mystery and sanctity until one reached the Holy of Holies, the dark, small chamber that housed the cult statue of the god. The most spectacular example is the Temple of Amun at Karnak. It is not a single building, but a vast complex of temples, chapels, pylons, and obelisks built and added to by successive pharaohs over nearly 2,000 years. Its hypostyle hall contains 134 massive columns, the largest of which are 70 feet tall and 33 feet in circumference. The entire temple complex is covered from floor to ceiling in hieroglyphs and reliefs depicting the pharaohs making offerings to the gods and their military victories. Another breathtaking example is the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, a masterpiece of elegant, terraced design that blends seamlessly into the towering limestone cliffs behind it. And then there is Abu Simbel, the great temple of Ramses II in Nubia, which was cut directly into a solid rock cliff. Its facade is dominated by 4 seated colossi of Ramses himself, each over 65 feet tall, meant to awe and intimidate travelers from the south and proclaim the pharaoh's eternal power. In a stunning feat of modern engineering, the entire temple was moved piece by piece in the 1960s to save it from the rising waters of Lake Nasser created by the Aswan High Dam. Beyond these grand state monuments, the Egyptians were masters of other arts and crafts. Their statuary, carved from granite, diorite, and basalt, was designed to be eternal and unchanging. It followed strict conventions. Figures are often shown in rigid formal poses, with left foot forward for men, hands clenched or holding symbols of office. The aim was not realism, but an idealized representation of the subject's essence, capturing them in a state of perfect, eternal existence. This is why, despite the formal style, the best Egyptian statues possess a profound and serene vitality. They also excelled in the delicate and beautiful art of jewelry, using gold, which they considered the flesh of the gods, and inlaying it with vibrant semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian. They created exquisite pectorals, broad collars, bracelets, and rings, often with protective amuletic symbolism. The treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb are the ultimate testament to their skill. They were also pioneers in everyday technology. They developed a form of paper from the papyrus plant, invented the shaduf, a counterweighted irrigation tool still used today, created a sophisticated calendar of 365 days, and were expert physicians, with knowledge of setting broken bones, performing simple surgeries, and using a vast pharmacopoeia of herbal remedies. Their art, their technology, and their architecture were all in service to one goal: to create and maintain a perfect, ordered world that mirrored the cosmos, a world that would last forever. But what of the people who built this civilization? The society was highly stratified, a steep pyramid with the pharaoh at the apex. Immediately below him were the viziers, the chief administrators, and the high priests of the major cults. Then came the nobility, the provincial governors, and the senior military commanders. A vast bureaucracy of scribes was the glue that held the state together. They recorded everything: taxes, grain stores, legal disputes, and royal decrees. Being a scribe was the path to social advancement, and young boys trained for years in special schools to master the complex hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts. Below them were the skilled artisans, the painters, sculptors, jewelers, and carpenters who created the beautiful objects for the elite and the temples. At the base of the social pyramid were the farmers, who made up the vast majority of the population. Their life was one of hard labor, tied to the cycles of the Nile, but they were not slaves. They paid a large portion of their harvest as taxes and were also subject to corvée labor, being conscripted for state projects like building pyramids or digging canals. There was also a class of slaves, typically prisoners of war, who worked in households, temples, and state mines. Despite the rigid hierarchy, there is evidence that Egyptians valued mat in social dealings, and women enjoyed a relatively high status compared to other ancient societies. They could own and manage property, initiate divorce, and bring cases before a court. Some, like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, even ascended to the very pinnacle of power. Daily life was simple but rich. Homes were made of mud brick, cool in the heat. The diet was based on bread and beer, which were consumed by everyone, from the pharaoh to the humblest laborer. The bread was often coarse and gritty from desert sand and stone chips from the grinding process, leading to significant tooth wear. They also enjoyed a variety of vegetables like onions, garlic, leeks, lentils, and cucumbers, and fruits like dates, figs, and grapes, from which they made wine. Meat from cattle, goats, and sheep was a luxury for most, while fish from the Nile was more common. They loved personal adornment, using kohl, a black powder, to line their eyes, not only for beauty, but also to reduce the sun's glare and protect against eye infections. They wore linen clothing, usually white, and adorned themselves with wigs, jewelry, and perfumed cones of fat that would melt over their heads at parties, releasing a pleasant scent. Children played with dolls, balls, and toy animals. They enjoyed music with harps, lutes, and sistrums accompanying singers at feasts and in temple rituals. Board games like the popular Senet, which symbolized the journey of the soul through the underworld, were a common pastime. The intellectual achievements of the Egyptians were as monumental as their buildings. Their system of writing, hieroglyphs, the words of the gods, is one of the most beautiful and complex ever created. It consisted of hundreds of characters, a mix of logograms, symbols representing words, and phonograms, symbols representing sounds. It could be written from left to right, right to left, or top to bottom, with the direction of the animal and human signs indicating the start of the line. For everyday purposes, they used a cursive script called hieratic, and later, an even more simplified form called demotic. The ability to read hieroglyphs was lost after the closure of pagan temples in the Roman era, and it was only with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, a decree inscribed in hieroglyphs, demotic, and Greek, that the brilliant French scholar Jean-François Champollion was able to crack the code in 1822, unlocking the vast written record of Egypt and giving the civilization its voice again. In mathematics, they used a decimal system and could perform complex arithmetic and geometry, essential for measuring fields and designing pyramids. They understood basic fractions and could solve simple algebraic equations. In medicine, their knowledge was a mixture of practical observation, magic, and religion. The Edwin Smith Papyrus shows a surprisingly rational approach to trauma surgery, describing the diagnosis and treatment of wounds. The Ebers Papyrus is a vast compendium of medical knowledge, covering ailments from head to toe and listing hundreds of prescriptions and magical spells. They diagnosed by feeling the pulse and observing symptoms, and their treatments, while sometimes involving incantations, also included effective remedies using honey, an antiseptic, willow, a source of salicylic acid like aspirin, and moldy bread, which contains a primitive antibiotic. The long, magnificent history of ancient Egypt finally drew to a close. After the New Kingdom, the country was ruled by a succession of foreign powers. The Libyans, the Nubians, and then the Persians took control. The last native dynasty was the 30th. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great of Macedon conquered Egypt peacefully, was hailed as a liberator from the Persians, and was crowned pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria, which became a center of Hellenistic learning and culture. After his death, his general Ptolemy took control of Egypt, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies ruled from Alexandria, presenting themselves as traditional pharaohs, but the real power was Greek. The last of these Hellenistic rulers was the most famous, Cleopatra VII. Intelligent, politically savvy, and fluent in multiple languages, she forged alliances with the most powerful Romans of her day, first Julius Caesar, by whom she had a son, and then Mark Antony. Their defeat in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, sealed their fate and the fate of Egypt. With the suicides of Antony and Cleopatra in 30 BCE, Egypt was annexed as a province of the Roman Empire. The line of the pharaohs was extinguished. Over the following centuries, the old religion slowly faded, supplanted first by Greco-Roman beliefs and then, decisively, by Christianity. The temples were closed, the knowledge of hieroglyphs was forgotten, and the sands of the desert began to reclaim the mighty monuments. The civilization that had endured for 3 millennia slipped into silence, becoming a land of mystery and legend. Yet the legacy of Egypt is immortal. The rediscovery of its treasures by Napoleon's expedition in 1798 ignited a global fascination with Egyptology that burns brighter than ever today. The Rosetta Stone gave us the key to their language. The discovery of Tutankhamun's intact tomb by Howard Carter in 1922 provided an unimaginable glimpse into the wealth and artistry of the pharaohs. Modern archaeology, using tools like ground-penetrating radar and CT scanners, continues to make stunning discoveries, from hidden chambers in the Great Pyramid to lost cities like the Rise of Aten under the sand. The obelisks of Egypt stand in the great cities of the world, from Rome to London to New York. Their architectural forms have inspired generations. Their concepts of justice, order, and the soul's judgment have influenced Western thought. They teach us about the power of human belief, the drive for immortality, and the breathtaking heights a civilization can reach when it harnesses the power of a river, the dedication of its people, and a vision of the cosmos that is both profound and beautiful. The pyramids still stand against the desert sky. The Sphinx still keeps its watch. The voices of the priests, the farmers, the kings, and the artisans may be silent, but their story is not over. It is written in stone, waiting for us to listen. The story of ancient Egypt is, and will always be forever.